Dr. Hawass motioned us to follow him and led us to the rump of the Sphinx. There he uncovered a small passage, a sort of opening to a tunnel underneath the rump. And then an extraordinary thing happened.
This tunnel has been never opened before. No one really knows what's inside this tunnel. But we are going to open it for the first time.
This is where the story gets into quite a bit of intrigue. What actually happened during the Shor Expedition has always been something of a mystery, at least until now. Now we know that at least 2 more GPR and seismic surveys have been done at the Sphinx to show that large, regular chambers exist in the bedrock, as well as tunnels and passages leading off towards the pyramids. Although the Shor Expedition was halted in late 1996, it wasn't just the claims about the Sphinx that drove this decision, as this was far from the only discovery, nor the only, let's say, very interesting location that was examined with ground-penetrating radar.
Opaque was lowered safely to the bottom of the well. He fired up his radar. Then we hit the jackpot. The radar showed a void. This anomalous cavity, as he called it, descended at an angle of 25 degrees, directly toward the rear of the Sphinx. A transverse radar scan revealed that this cavity was about 8 feet wide and had a domed ceiling.
Another Japanese team went down into the Osiris Shaft and probed this same tunnel with an endoscopic camera in a pipe. What it reveals is truly amazing. This is remarkable, and we have a little bit to unpack here. There is 100% man-made rock-cut tunnels and chambers down here. And the commentary says the tunnel splits, presumably going in different directions. Is it possible that one of these connects to the Great Pyramid? Welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and I hope that you're all doing well. The history of excavations and discovery on the Giza Plateau in Egypt, particularly the most well-known areas of it, like the Great Sphinx, the massive stone pyramids, or the giant causeway connecting them, is a topic that hasn't exactly ever been transparent. Opaque would be a better word for it, but overall what's actually happened or been discovered in these locations is a topic that could charitably be described as shrouded in mystery. It's a topic that's held me fascinated for many years, and although I've heard much through rumour, speculation and second-hand accounts, based on the old adage that even the sun shines on a dog's ass some days, some new information and footage about a particularly mysterious recent period of excavation at Giza has come to light, and that's what I want to share with you today. This is the follow-up video that I mentioned in my recent Labyrinth presentation. Many thanks for all the kind words, and to everybody who viewed it, by the way. I really wasn't expecting it to go as viral as it did. This video also serves as a follow-up to an older one that I made a couple of years back on the Sphinx Temple. That video touched on the expeditions that we're going to discuss today, and also in that video I said I would revisit these topics in more detail in a future one. Now, sometimes it takes me a little while, in this case maybe 2.5 years, but I do eventually get around to doing these things. If you haven't seen the Sphinx Temple video that I'm talking about, I'd highly recommend watching it before this one. It will provide significant context to what we're getting into here. The link is below in the description. The reality is the Giza Plateau, and certainly the other ancient sites of Egypt, have been subject to excavation and exploration for hundreds, even thousands of years at this point. We know that during the latter periods of the dynastic Egyptian civilization, in the millenniums BC preceding what we refer to as year zero, during the Middle, New and Ptolemaic periods, the Sphinx was at different times buried in sand, and the ancient stonework and structures of the oldest periods of ancient Egypt were being disassembled, looted, quarried and reused for their high-quality stone. Even the famous Dream Stele, the inscribed granite slab that today sits between the paws of the Sphinx that tells the story of Thutmose IV of the 18th dynasty, roughly 1400 BC, was itself created from a recycled granite casing block taken from the already ancient Sphinx Temple. Shortly after Thutmose IV's time, the Sphinx Temple itself was lost to the sands, and the ancient Egyptians of the early New Kingdom built a small temple to Amenhotep II on top of the corner of the Sphinx Temple. The remnants of this temple to Amenhotep can still be seen today as you enter the Sphinx enclosure. overlapping and on top of the vastly more ancient megalithic structure below it. That notorious usurper of monuments, Ramses II of the 19th dynasty, was taking granite stones from the middle pyramid at Giza for use in a variety of his projects in other locations, a fact established by the obvious quarry marks on these incredible granite casing stones, and by the statement that's been proudly carved into the walls of the pyramid's bedrock enclosure by his quarrymaster. The Persian, Roman, and Greek civilizations who contested and ruled over Egypt in different periods from roughly 660 BC through 640 AD were similarly reusing, recycling, exploring, and building on top of what were significantly ancient structures in Egypt even then. Persian rulers of what was known as the 27th and later on the 31st dynasties conquered Egypt in the 600s BC, with famous names like Cyrus the Great, Cambyses, Darius, and Xerxes dominating for centuries, before giving way to the Macedonians and Greeks of the Ptolemaic times, roughly 330 to 30 BC. After this period, in what is considered the end of the ancient Egyptian civilization with the death of Cleopatra around 30 BC, Egypt became an imperial province of the Roman Empire until around 641 AD. The Romans, industrious as ever, built massively upon the more ancient architecture up and down Egypt and the Nile. Entire temples were reconstructed on top of much older foundations and structures. Massive and monolithic columns and obelisks were reused, recarved, or even removed entirely from Egypt and taken to Rome, where many can still be seen today. The Romans built a huge stone stair in front of the Sphinx, once again building over the top of the already lost, already buried, and already once built over Sphinx temple. This Roman stair was removed during the excavation of the Sphinx and subsequent modern discovery of the Sphinx temple by Egyptian archaeologist Salim Hassan in the early 1920s. Artifacts from the Ptolemaic or Greek-Roman period clearly show the dominion that the culture of ancient Egypt had on its so-called conquerors. The ancient Egyptian art style lent heavy influence to the stone carvings and paintings executed by the Greeks and Romans. The pantheon of gods from ancient Egypt were renamed and adapted for new times, with some language, traditions, symbols, and even rituals persisting down to our modern times, religions, and language of today. Who knows what discoveries of ancient treasures, knowledge, or inexplicable finds were made during these eras? We do have some accounts from these times, from 600 BC through to around the 1st century AD, from authors in antiquity like Herodotus, Diodorus Siculus, Pliny the Elder, Strabo, all describing the pyramids and Sphinx, even then buried in sand to its chest, and even then vastly ancient, silent, and imposing. Strabo even described entering the Great Pyramid through what must have been its original entrance at the top of the descending passage, by way of a movable or pivoting block on the casing. During medieval times and the Islamic conquest of Egypt from 640 through to roughly 1500 AD, Giza and the pyramids were ruled over by various caliphates and dynasties. Amongst other events, this period is also when the famous mosques and other part of what is known today as Old Cairo were built. The Al-Azhar Mosque, the Al-Hakim Mosque, the massive and grand Mosque of Sultan Hassan, and the amazing Muhammad Ali Mosque, known as the Alabaster Mosque, all had their initial constructions and indeed later restorations and rebuilds during the Islamic period. They're very much worth a visit if you ever get the chance. The architecture is just spectacular. I've spent a couple of days myself exploring these parts of Cairo. It's perhaps no surprise that the very same, very human tendency to build using resources that were on hand, as it were, played a significant part in the building of these monuments. Tons of alabaster were removed from ancient Egyptian sites to be used in construction, particularly at the Alabaster Mosque. Dozens of the large single-piece granite columns were relocated from pyramids and temples and reused in the mosques. On some of these columns, you can even see the advanced age and the spalling surface of the granite. It's the same thing you'll find on some of the oldest of Old Kingdom granite structures like the Valley Temple. We even found some porphyry columns, likely also incredibly ancient, and just spectacular in their colouring and finish. While examining the walls, lintels, and thresholds of these structures, it's quite common to find blocks with inscribed hieroglyphs being recycled as building material in Old Cairo. Even some statues and individual artifacts were relocated and are still housed in the grounds of the mosques. Down in the lower parts of the old city, in a dark, dank, and frankly stinky cistern or tunnel that seems to have served as a convenient trash dumping spot, we found granite casing stones from the third pyramid. And inside this culvert, some local resident had made his bed on top of the ancient granite blocks. It was also during the Islamic period in around 820 AD that the Caliph Al-Mamun is said to have hammered his way into the Great Pyramid, creating the Robber's Tunnel via which the pyramid is still accessed by tourists today. Exactly when, why, and how this tunnel was made is very much a subject of debate, and the truth is, we really don't know. I suspect it's more likely the tunnel was cut as a means to get something out of the pyramid rather than to force a passage in. If it was hammered through the masonry as a way of entering the structure, it's utterly remarkable and frankly quite unlikely that it would so unerringly target the exact spot it needed to in order to gain access to the interior, which is the intersection of the ascending and descending passages. The ascending passage that leads up to the Grand Gallery and the upper chambers intersects into the descending passage, which is the one that runs incredibly straight directly through the pyramid and the bedrock below to the subterranean chamber. It intersects it by means of what might well have been another pivoting stone block on the ceiling of the descending passage. Today, this block is gone, and immediately behind where it once was, in the bottom of the ascending passage, there are 3 immense granite blocks that have been wedged into that tunnel, effectively blocking the way. A circular staircase has been constructed to go around these blocks that you'll find at the end of that robber's tunnel, down to the bottom to enter the descending passage, and at the top of the stair, around the granite plugs, is the climb up the ascending passage, leading to the incredible architecture of the Grand Gallery and the so-called King and Queen's chambers. Related to this robber's tunnel is an account that's only fairly recently been recovered. A rare document, one that has long been thought lost, was rediscovered during a move of the British Museum in 2002 and subsequently republished in only a handful of copies, one of which I'm lucky to own. It's Henry Salt's account of one of the earliest documented excavations at the Sphinx, conducted by Captain Giovanni Caviglia. Henry Salt was the British Consul General in Egypt in the early 1800s, and amongst Salt's documents was found an account and translation of an exploration of the pyramids by Sharif el-Adresi from 623 AD. Now, this is 200 years before the time that Al-Mamun is said to have forced his way into the pyramid via the Robber's Tunnel. This account from el-Adresi tells of entering the pyramid by way of an opened tunnel that lead to the passages that ascend into the interior, as well as to one that descends down to its lower recesses. El-Adresi's account of the ascending path into the pyramid speaks of multiple stone gates and a sloping alley with a well to the right as you enter it. This clearly seems to be a description of entering the Grand Gallery that he calls a sloping or ascending alley, with the well shaft that is still there and it is still to the right as you enter it today. It's locked behind a steel grate. The well shaft is a vertical masonry passage that leads down to the small bedrock chamber that's known as the grotto, and from there it goes on down to intersect with nearly the bottom of the descending passage, just before you enter the subterranean chamber. Further on in his account of this sloping alley, el-Adresi describes entering a square stone room, the Queen's Chamber, with the ceiling covered by, quote, writings in the most ancient characters of the heathen priests, end quote, and also it had an empty vessel standing in it. Presumably he's describing a stone box or a coffer that was once in the Queen's Chamber, because his account also details a similar empty vessel in the upper room, reached after ascending the Grand Gallery or his sloping alley, and here he's obviously describing the stone box that's still found in the King's Chamber, which was empty even then. Not only that, but el-Adresi also recounts that the chamber, the King's Chamber, had a large hole made in the floor, obviously some evidence for ancient excavations and searches in the King's Chamber itself. This account comes from around 630 AD, roughly 1,400 years before our modern times. And even at this time, it seems like the pyramid was a target for exploration, excavation, and looting. What happened to the box in the Queen's Chamber? What might have been found in the excavations that were made in the King's Chamber? We'll likely never know. Such is the enduring and mysterious nature of these monuments that have drawn the attention of men for millennia. El Adresi further tells of entering what he called the Red Pyramid, a name we give today to the mighty stone pyramid at nearby Dashur, but El Adresi was referring not to this one, but to what we today call the Third Pyramid at Giza, attributed to Pharaoh Menkaure. He describes it as being the third and smaller of those still standing at Giza, that was opened on its northern side, and led into a descending passage going down to a, quote, difficult and fatiguing passage where one creeps along upon the stomach. This well describes the bedrock passages and chambers below the third pyramid, if you assume them to be near full to the top with rubble and debris. Here also, he explains that several pits were dug in an oblong square chamber, and after which another chamber is reached, whose walls were formed by 6 or 7 more chambers with arched doors. A long, blue-coloured and quite empty stone vessel is described as being located here. Evidently, the third pyramid at Giza was also well excavated, explored, and looted even in his time. El Adresi recounts tales from the Sharif Abu el-Hussein, supposedly present when this stone box was first found, and he says that it contained golden tablets inscribed with characters of a language that nobody could understand. There isn't a box in the chamber beneath the third pyramid today, although there once was, and it's unfortunately sitting somewhere on the floor of the Mediterranean Sea at this point. Howard Weiss and John Perring removed it from the pyramid in the 1800s, loading it onto the merchant ship Beatrice, which was lost and presumably sank at sea after leaving port at Malta on October 13th, 1838. Here you can see the original insurance survey of the vessel, and unfortunately this granite box from the pyramid is only one of many such artifacts that have been lost to the waters of the Mediterranean. Weiss and Perring, in their exploration in the 1800s, did however find some bones that were still in this box when they entered this chamber beneath the third pyramid. These bones did eventually make it back to England, and they were, much later on, radiocarbon dated to the Coptic period around the 1st centuries AD. Quite obviously, it means that this pyramid was reused for later burials. This evidence, along with the previous accounts of activity inside these ancient structures, is an excellent example of why it's so important to consider the long context of exploration, excavation, and even renovation and reuse of these monuments as they pass through time. After all, as the saying goes, men fear time, but time fear the pyramids. It's very difficult to take any single inscription, artifact, or even carbon date and say that definitively this is when these structures were built. I want to take a very quick break here before we get into the modern accounts of exploration and the tale that I want to really tell in this video, to say that this video is being brought to you by the Value for Value model and my amazing supporter community. I don't really do any sponsorships or brand deals or ad reads on this channel. I get offers for them all the time. I much prefer to stick to the value for value model, which goes along the lines of, if you do get some value from this work, please do consider returning some of that value to me, whether it's in time, talent, or treasure. You can find all of the ways to do that. They're on my website, unchartedx.com/support. I do want to extend a massive thank you again to all of my amazing supporters and patrons. You guys are the reason that I'm able to keep doing this work. I do try to provide some exclusive resources to my supporters, things like early access to register for tours. I do supporter-only Q&As and videos and previews of upcoming videos. I share a lot of my scripts, my resources, as well as providing access to all of my LiDAR scans and other things that I've done while I'm on ancient sites. Also, I just wanted to let people know that as of me recording this, we do have 3 or 4 spots open for our tour of Peru and Bolivia that's happening in October 23 through November 6. It's going to be an epic tour. We only have about 30 people coming. I'm co-hosting this along with Kyle and Russ Allen, as well as Yusuf Awan, who's coming over from Egypt with us. And we're working with some really excellent local Peruvian guides. We're going to do a couple of off-the-beaten-path excursions, like hiking to the Alante Tambo Quarry, also climbing Huayna Picchu, which is the mountain behind Machu Picchu. So if you're interested in that, please do take a look at the itinerary. There's a link to a wait list there. Just sign up to it, and I will offer spots on the tour based on the order that they're received on the wait list. And lastly, I just wanted to let everybody know that my new merch with a lot of new designs is up and available at my Dashery store. It's a new merch store that I've set up. I'm very happy to be partnered with these guys. Wearing one of these t-shirts right now. Check it out. So lots of new designs, and I think it's high quality gear. They ship very quickly. I've been very impressed with working with them. I've had nothing but good feedback. I think it's a great way to support the channel and to get some natty threads out of it on your own. I think some of the designs are a lot of fun. This on the back of a zip-up hoodie or some of the other new designs, I'm quite proud of them. Please do check them out if you're interested. The links are on my website and below in the description. Let's get back to the video. All of this history and accounts of ancient explorations and the reuse of the monuments at Giza now brings us to the relatively more modern era of exploration in Egypt. While much of the ancient history of discovery is simply lost to the sands of time, the same can't be said of the modern era. Records do exist, although exactly where they are and to whom they're available is another question. While many modern explorations have been made entirely public, it's also true that these same monuments have been subject to private and secretive expeditions, intrigue, if not outright cover-ups. Individuals or entire groups of people, from academic institutions to governments to private clubs and societies, have, over time, sought their own agendas and outcomes beneath the ground and inside the monuments of the Giza Plateau, with only a fraction of that work ever being fully documented and made publicly available. Of course, not everybody has had personal enrichment or gaining secretive private knowledge as their goal. Salim Hassan is a good example, as was Auguste Mariette, and one of the many reasons that I find the great Sir William Flinders Petrie to be my very favourite archaeologist was his determination to make his own decades of work in Egypt available to everyone. Over his many years of work and pioneering expeditions, excavations and surveys, several of which are still relied upon today as the authoritative works, Petrie published his discoveries and theories in a total of 97 books over his lifetime. I've personally found Petrie's prolific writings to be genuinely valuable, granting insight into our modern civilization's first engineering-oriented investigation into the deep history of Egypt. I say that because the Industrial Revolution and the beginnings of the true discipline of engineering had only recently begun in Petrie's era. It still really blows my mind that it's taken our civilization thousands of years to develop this capability, and it's only been in the last couple hundred years that we've even had the context with which to understand and qualify the remarkable precision and engineering works of the great lost builder culture that is responsible for so many monuments, architecture, and artifacts in ancient Egypt. As the 20th century progressed, so did the bureaucracy and power structures around who gets to dig where and for what become more centralized and formalized. In the latter half of the 1900s, the large-scale expeditions run by aristocratic Europeans essentially distilled down to academic institutions from around the world more or less having the long-term rights to excavate and explore different sites and areas in Egypt. For example, the Czechs are in Abu Sir, the French are in Saqqara, the Americans and British are at Giza, the German Archaeological Institute is on Elephantine Island, and the list goes on. To some extent, that's still the status quo and how archaeology is done in Egypt to this day. But there have been many exceptions to this, with private, non-academic expeditions being granted access to sites conducted well away from the public gaze and funded by either individuals or specific groups. The overarching control structure governing these permissions has, in this time period, been exerted by what's known today as the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities in Egypt. It was previously known as the Supreme Council of Antiquities, an official governmental organization that's today headed by the Minister of Tourism and Antiquities. The Supreme Council still exists, but it's been folded into the Ministry of Tourism. But it does predate this ministry, having been founded in 1850. And funnily enough, its first conservator was Auguste Mariette, a French archaeologist, which led to him making, let's just say, some decisions that probably weren't in the best interest of Egypt. They, the high officials in the ministry, create the agreements with foreign institutions to work on these sites. And importantly, they also control the release of any information on things that are found during these digs. The ministry also does conduct its own Egyptian-led excavations and expeditions wherever and whenever they see fit. The Ministry of Tourism is also in control of access to both public and non-public or closed ancient sites and monuments. Egypt sure does love its bureaucracy. As with many things, it seems like the ancient Egyptians might have invented it, and trust me, red tape is still running aplenty inside the ministry. All the guards, inspectors, and high officials lord over what seems like endless paperwork, permissions, and documents, things that come with trying to get anything done on these sites or even getting permission to access those that are not just typically open for tourism. Thankfully, I'm blessed to work with some very talented and well-connected people in Egypt. It took us a couple of years, but we did finally manage to get a permission made to enter the Sphinx Temple. That's what that previous video was about a couple of years back. Now, that permission is also available to other groups in Egypt. Every time that I run a trip to Egypt, my main man there, Mo, who runs the excellent tour agency we use, he's always running around with a backpack full of paperwork and a phone in his hand to get things done and make everything run smoothly, and he's quite the operator. Over the last 50 years or so, one figure rose to significant prominence in the Supreme Council and then Ministry of Tourism. A person anyone interested in the mysteries of ancient Egypt is likely to be familiar with, Dr. Zahi Hawass. Starting out as an inspector at Giza in the 1970s, he completed his PhD in Egyptology in America, allegedly funded by the Edgar Cayce Foundation, and we'll get back to them. For a long time, he was the Inspector General, the big boss for the entire Giza Plateau. He became the Secretary General for the Supreme Council of Antiquities in 2002 and was later appointed as the Minister of State for Antiquities in 2011. Depending on who you listen to, he either resigned from his post or was fired shortly after this time. Hawass remains active and extremely well known internationally, having featured in many documentaries and TV shows over the years, right down to recent times and the new media landscape, appearing on YouTube episodes with Mr. Beast and as a guest on podcasts like the Joe Rogan Experience. Now in his late 70s and retired from official public duties, he does remain both a powerful and influential figure in Egypt, as many of those in powerful positions in antiquities today are his former students. Here's a recent example of his influence. In 2023, the then Secretary General of the Council of Antiquities, Mustafa Waziri, made international headlines by excavating in front of the third pyramid at Giza, showing that its courses continued down deeper below the ground level. Personally, I thought this was fantastic, and I really hope that one day they clear off the entire base of the pyramid and expose its foundations. I was less enthusiastic about the other things that he said that he wanted to do. Waziri stirred up significant international controversy by claiming that they wanted to rebuild the pyramid from the piles of granite casing stones that were still found around it. Not a fan of that idea. It would never be what it once originally was. They'd use concrete extensively, which honestly would probably just fall apart in another 50 years or so if any of the sort of previous restoration works in Egypt or anything to go by, and it would just be a facsimile of what it once was. I'm all for repairing stuff that needs it and that is actively falling apart, but otherwise, I think we really should just leave things as they are and let us use our imaginations to picture their original forms. I clearly wasn't the only one that objected to this, as the outcry over this statement caused the Egyptian government to respond, and a tribunal was appointed to decide what to do about it. That tribunal was headed by Zahi Hawass, and Mustafa Waziri was reportedly removed from his position as a result. I bring all of this up because Zahi has been a central figure in a lot of the excavations and events that have happened on the Giza Plateau over the last 50 years. Certainly, he's been involved with many well-known researchers over the last few decades. Earlier on, in the 80s and 90s, according to accounts I've heard and read, everything seemed pretty copacetic, and Zahi was well known to be approachable and friendly and to help independent researchers with their efforts, even facilitating their investigations. Here he is with Robert Bauval, John Anthony West, and Graham Hancock in the Sphinx enclosure. He also aided and worked with Chris Dunn in the early 2000s when he was doing the bulk of his on-site investigations into the evidence for machining in ancient Egypt. Yet, as many people know, in later years, these relationships were anything but copacetic, and Dr. Hawass became extremely critical, if not outrightly hostile, towards independent researchers, and certainly developed a, let's say, notorious reputation within Egyptological circles. He's undoubtedly a polarizing figure, but has definitely made his mark in terms of fame, discoveries, and, like it or not, his appearances have grown a broad international interest in ancient Egypt, although during his long career he certainly wasn't free of controversy. Hawass is a prolific author and co-author, usually with Mark Lehner, of many books, and has always been a relentless champion for returning antiquities back to Egypt. I know many people have strong opinions about Zahi, myself included, but I'm not here to get into those gritty details of past interactions, and I don't want to speak particularly ill of anyone. There's plenty out there in the public record for people to make their own judgments, but as he's a central figure in the stories that I want to get into today, I think a little bit of context on his background is warranted. Personally, I've only very briefly met Dr. Hawass a couple of times myself. I've seen him present live. I've been down in the Sphinx enclosure with him. I was on the tour and in the room when the infamous debate, or rather lack of debate, with Graham Hancock took place. And over my recent trips to Egypt, we've found ourselves in the same place here and there a few times. Returning to our tale, one part of the Giza Plateau that's been of particular interest to people from all over the world has always been the Great Sphinx. This fascinating monument, carved from solid bedrock, has, as much as the pyramids, represented the iconography and mystery of ancient Egypt. It stands silent and imposing, with its multitude of repairs and restoration work done to it over the millennia, restoration work that goes back as far as the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt itself. Perhaps of more interest to the initiated is what the Sphinx represents and what it might be standing sentinel over, and for just how long it's been standing there. The idea that the Sphinx might be much older than the accepted timeline for the ancient Egyptian civilization really isn't a new one, even though the best evidence for this these days is widely attributed to the geological findings of water erosion on its enclosure that were put forth by John Anthony West and Robert Schoch in the 1990s. Schoch's findings are hard scientific support for what was already a very ancient idea, that the Sphinx could be tens of thousands of years old and trace its origins back to Zep Tepi, the time of the gods, which according to the history of the ancient Egyptians themselves stretches back some nearly 40,000 years. Pharaoh Amenhotep II in 1448 BC referred to the Sphinx as being very ancient, older than the pyramids themselves. Pliny, the Roman naturalist from the 1st century AD, noted that the Egyptians held the Sphinx sacred as the tomb of King Amenhotep, which is the Hellenized name for one of the early gods of the Nile, who supposedly existed in the ages prior to the dynastic civilization. Gaston Maspero, who conducted one of the earliest surveys of the Sphinx in the 1920s, stated his belief that it dated to an age long before the dynasties, saying, quote, "The Great Sphinx Harmachis, its ancient name, has mounted guard over the plateau ever since the time of the followers of Horus, the Shemsu Hor, the age of gods and heroes, 12,000 years ago." End quote. In Orthodox Egyptology, the Sphinx is attributed as a creation of King Khafra, son of Khufu, in the 4th dynasty around 2560-2550 BC. And indeed, Khafra's name does appear on the Dream Stele, which is the inscribed granite block still standing between the front legs of the Sphinx. As we covered earlier, the Dream Stele itself was created more than 1,000 years after Khafre's time. But because Khafra's name is on it, this is cited therefore as primary proof that he built it, and thus dates the Sphinx to the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. The Dream Stele is quite well preserved and excellently inscribed. It tells the tale of Thutmose IV of the 18th dynasty in the New Kingdom around 1400 BC, who fell asleep in the shade of the Sphinx, which was at that time buried in sand up to his chest, and received a vision in his dreams from it that said if he freed the Sphinx from the sands, he would become king. Indeed, that seems to be exactly what happened. He cleared the sand from the monument and did eventually become king. Perhaps this is just propaganda from the time that was tying the young king to the ancient gods of the plateau, but it does seem clear that he excavated the statue. When it comes to Khafre's name being on the stele, however, context matters, as the claim from Egyptology is that the dream stele says that Khafre built it. Renowned Egyptologist J.H. Breasted said that attributing the Sphinx to Khafre based on the inscription on the stele is a, quote, conclusion that does not follow from the text. The context from the preceding lines suggests that Thutmose was praising the monarchs who had done the same thing before him, meaning that he's saying Khafre didn't make the Sphinx, but rather freed it from the sands, it presumably being already ancient, even in Khafre's time, and then he became king. Gaston Maspero, another pioneering Egyptologist, supported this interpretation of the text, saying that, quote, it's almost certain proof that the Sphinx was already buried in sand by the time of Khafre and his predecessors, end quote. This is further supported by the rarely acknowledged inventory stele, also known as the Stele of Khufu's daughter, which says that Khufu, the father of Khafre, attempted to dig the Sphinx out of the sand and repair it. How did Khafre make the Sphinx if his dad Khufu was already trying to repair it? What we do know for certain is that the Sphinx has been buried in sand for many thousands of years, during many periods throughout the dynastic Egyptian civilization and those that follow it, and right down to our time. It's spent far more time in recent millennia buried in sand than it hasn't. In the 17 and 1800s, many attempts were made to free it from the sand, the work ultimately proving too much, only for it to be buried back up to its chest again within a few years. It wasn't until Salim Hassan in the 1920s that in our time the Sphinx and its enclosure was fully extracted from the shifting sands of Egypt. This in itself seems like quite an issue, maybe even a design oversight, if you're choosing to carve a statue in a low spot in a windy desert. Logic might follow that whoever built the monument likely didn't have the problem of the shifting desert sands, which then takes us back to the African humid period, when the Sahara Desert wasn't a desert and was a savanna instead, and Egypt itself was green and verdant, a period that ended no less than 6,000 years ago, but stretched far back into time before that. Remember that the geological evidence for water erosion, first proposed by Schwaller de Lubitz and then confirmed by Dr. Robert Schoch, cites thousands of years of rainfall being required to get the erosional effects that we see today on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure. So it follows that the monument had to have been standing for millennia, at least, during the far wetter African humid climatic period. Further, it seems that the Sphinx was venerated long before the time of Khafre. Although there is strong evidence that its head was recarved in early dynastic times, its iconic half-man, half-lion form was certainly not new in the time of Khafre. Sphinx carvings and small statues have been found in the burials of Khafre's predecessors, and examples of the same thing are also attributed to pre-dynastic times. In the pyramid texts and early dynastic literature, the name given to the Great Sphinx was Ruti, which was a variation on several names meaning guardian or protector of the secret sanctuary or of the underworld. In the so-called Book of the Dead, this sanctuary in the underworld is related to the deepest of mysteries and the passage of the soul into the realms of the immortal.
I was talking about with the Professor Jaber about the word, the oldest name of the Sphinx, Ruti. Ruti. And it means the two lines, Shu and the Tifnut. I remember my father telling me about the Sphinx being Tifnut and all this kind of thing. But the interesting part is that Rut is actually meaning the gate. So Ruti is the one who is protecting the gates of the lion. So this would be the oldest lion's gate ever.
Yeah.
Ruti. Yeah. Strange. And of course, when we talk about the guardian of the gate and all the mystery about the underground Hall of Records, or the passages that leads to the Restau, as the ancients themselves called it. They took that label from the Giza Plateau here.
Yeah.
Because of the many tunnels that runs underneath. So I know the American Institute was also talking about that they found parts here that is not solid bedrock, that it was actually constructed. And it seemed for them that it could be something that is leading further behind.
So, once again, the idea that the Sphinx stood guard over chambers and spaces in the bedrock below it is really not a new idea. And indeed, there are several accounts of this underworld extending beneath the entire plateau and even connecting to the pyramids. The Arab author Al-Telamasani, in a manuscript that's preserved in the British Museum, recounted tales that happened in his lifetime. Around the same time, Al-Mamun was said to have opened the Great Pyramid in the 800s AD. He speaks of how a party of workmen entered the pyramid and became lost, having wandered into chambers and long tunnels that were not known to anyone at the time. When they came out, they calculated that they had gone into the earth between the pyramid and the Nile, in the direction of the Sphinx, reportedly finding chambers with statues, one of them in black stone of a man holding a lance or a sword. There is also a Coptic tradition recorded by al-Masudi, who is known as the Herodotus of the Arabs. He was a historian, geographer, and traveller who lived in the 10th century AD. He talks about there existing a single subterranean chamber under the Sphinx, with passages leading to all three pyramids, and each entrance being guarded by, quote, mechanical statues of amazing capabilities, end quote. One of these statues, according to al-Masudi in this tradition, is said to be made of black agate and is of a man holding a lance. Another account comes from Susan Beth Fransheim, who was the wife of an American ambassador to New Zealand and who was deeply involved in research and restoration efforts on the Sphinx in the 1980s, along with the American Research Center in Egypt, Mark Lehner, and the Association for Research and Enlightenment, otherwise known as the Edgar Cayce Foundation. She recounts a story that comes from independent researcher Tom Valentine, who recorded the story of an American army colonel who was discussing ancient Egyptian mysticism with King Farouk of Egypt in 1945. The king supposedly offered to show him a secret, and they went to the Sphinx during the night, accessed a narrow tunnel behind a slab, entered a large chamber, and then standing in front of a further doorway was a statue of a man holding a sword. So are all of these tales from the past true? It's really hard to tell, because at the end of the day, that's all they are, is stories. Yet the similarities that come from them across cultures and many centuries of time seem to lend them a grain of truthfulness. Again, while these stories from the past are interesting, and much like those stories about the Great Lost Labyrinth, they merely provide context to understand what has taken place here in our modern times. They also show that the idea of the Hall of Records, or hidden chambers that are below the bedrock of the Sphinx that then connect with the rest of the plateau, is not a new one, and it's firmly represented in historical accounts. I had previously explored this topic in my video on the Sphinx Temple from a couple of years ago, and again, I'd highly recommend watching that one to get some deeper context. In that video, we covered that there have been at least 2 different seismic and ground-penetrating radar surveys done around the Sphinx, using different technologies. One of these was done by John Anthony West, and the other one by the Shor Foundation and 2 lifelong ARE or Edgar Cayce Foundation members, Joseph Jehoda and Dr. Joseph Shor, in what became known as the Shor Expedition. Both took place in the 1990s. John West's work, which led to the Mysteries of the Sphinx documentary, hosted by Charlton Heston, for which John West won an Emmy for Best Research in 1994 and was nominated for the Emmy for Best Documentary, was filmed from 1991 through 1993. The much more secretive Shor Expedition took place a few years later, in 1995 and 96. Both projects utilised the services of a seismic expert, Dr. Tom DeBecke, who used a variety of subsurface techniques like ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography to show that large, regular chambers exist in the bedrock beneath the front of the Sphinx, as well as tunnels and passages leading off towards the pyramids. One person who was deeply involved in both expeditions was the now late Boris Said, a filmmaker and documentary producer. A teenage friend of John West, he was the producer behind the Mystery of the Sphinx documentary, and he was a central figure in the Shor Expedition as someone who knew how to get permits and to get things done in Egypt. He was brought on to film and to create another documentary of this project. Here is a clip from my earlier video on the Sphinx Temple, when Boris Said went on Art Bell's radio show in the late 90s discussing the ground-penetrating radar work.
All right, there is some thought that within or beneath the Sphinx, the paw of the Sphinx, may lie chambers in which something called the Hall of Records may reside. Now, that would be, or I guess is said to be, a sort of a library documenting all the technology of this previous civilization. Is that correct?
That's the story, yes.
You believe that?
Let's put it this way. I know there's a chamber there because I've seen it on two different scientific instruments. In 1991, Dr. Doppler documented a 30 by 40 foot rectangular anomaly about 35 feet below the surface under the paws of the Sphinx, and he did that with seismic technology. We went back there in the spring of 1996, and Dr. Doppler, with ground-penetrating radar, confirmed that there was, in fact, a rectangular anomaly under the paws.
This was part of the Shor Expedition, or not?
This was, the first time was the John West Expedition.
John Anthony West?
Yes, and the second time was with part of the Shor Expedition.
So, in other words, through ultrasound, and then now through X-ray as well, there's confirmation in both technologies that there is a chamber indeed under the Sphinx.
Right.
This is where the story gets into quite a bit of intrigue and where the new information that I mentioned in the introduction to this video comes into play. What actually happened during the Shor Expedition has always been something of a mystery. Although Boris Said was brought on to film and produce a documentary, he ultimately had a falling out with Joseph Shor over the content and the rights of the film, and they ended up embroiled in a dispute, and the footage and details of the expedition never came to light, at least until now. To understand the significance and the driving forces behind this expedition, a bit of background on the ARE and the Casey Foundation is warranted, starting with Edgar Casey himself.
There have been many predictions about the role the Sphinx would play in our future. One of the most compelling was by this man. Edgar Casey gained popularity in the mid-40s as America's sleeping prophet. In deep trance, Casey revealed detailed information about ancient Egypt. 50 years ago, Casey predicted that a chamber would be found under the front paws of the Sphinx. This chamber, he said, would contain records of the civilization that inspired the entire Egyptian culture. He called that civilization Atlantis. According to Casey, the Atlanteans were a technologically advanced society who fled to Egypt when their continent of Atlantis sank into the ocean to be lost forever.
Casey's trances and visions weren't only to do with ancient Egypt, but also apparently with the stock market, and supposedly a lot of people around him made an awful lot of money based on his predictions, leading to the formation of the Edgar Casey Foundation, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the ARE, which is still going strong today. The ARE has always sought to find the mythical Hall of Records, and clearly believes in the concept of lost ancient civilizations, particularly Atlantis, and that ancient Egypt was one of the inheritors of its legacy. They've been involved in searches and drilling experiments at the Giza Plateau since at least the late 1970s. Here is Mark Lehner with Hugh Lynn Casey, the son of Edgar Casey, at the Sphinx in 1978. Along with a young Zahi Hawass, supervising a drilling search at the paws of the Sphinx. Here's another black and white image of that drilling happening at the Sphinx, obviously at its right forepaw. According to a report from project leader Lambert Dolphin, the drilling in 1978 was sponsored by the ARE and Hugh Lynn Casey, who along with ARE member Joseph Jehoda was in attendance, working with Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass. They drilled 5 4-inch holes around the Sphinx, investigating subsurface anomalies, but reportedly found nothing. That certainly didn't seem to discourage the ARE from persisting with trying to confirm Casey's visions. These drilling experiments have continued into the 21st century, as shown by an ARE newsletter from 2009 that details how ARE members met with Zahi Hawass after he presented to them for an hour and funded the acquisition of drilling equipment that was then sent to Egypt, and that it was, quote, a major step towards finding one of Casey's 3 Atlantean record caches, end quote. The ARE certainly seems to have enjoyed a very strong relationship with the authorities in Egypt, particularly with Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner. Their pursuit of Atlantis as an overarching goal to their work in Egypt has never been a secret. Casey's visions were widely publicized at the time. This doesn't seem to make much sense when you consider the support they've received from Hawass and Lehner, and their public position on any theory or research that dares suggest that some of the monuments at Giza might predate the Old Kingdom, or that ancient lost civilizations even exist, which is to say that they deny and decry them. When John Anthony West's The Mystery of the Sphinx documentary came out to popular acclaim, which not only tied the Sphinx to Atlantis but mentioned Edgar Cayce, Hawass was allegedly enraged by it and refused to grant any further permits to John West and Robert Schoch for work in Egypt. Lehner and Hawass said that West's seismic findings of chambers and passages beneath the Sphinx were nothing more than natural cracks and fissures in the bedrock. Why then, only a couple of years later, would the authorities in Egypt choose to work with ARE members on the Shor Expedition, which were following in the footsteps of John West's work at the Sphinx? The Shor Expedition started up around 1995 in partnership with Hawass, seen here with Dr. Joseph Shor and Joseph Jehoda, and they were granted a multi-year renewable exploration permit on the Giza Plateau. Their experiments and exploration took place at the Sphinx, up and down the causeway, and inside the Great Pyramid. The support from Hawass is perhaps not that surprising when you consider what was said by Hugh Lynn Cayce, who is the son of Edgar Cayce. Hawass and Mark Lehner have long been associated with the ARE. They've enjoyed significant patronage from them for many years and have been known to speak at their events and conferences multiple times. Hugh Lynn Cayce claims in his book, About My Father's Business, that they got Hawass a PhD scholarship to Penn State University in the United States thanks to an ARE member on the Fulbright Scholarship Board. It's worth noting that Hawass has denied these claims, and according to Robert Boval, when John West mentioned them in 1995 to various people, he was threatened with legal action. Ostensibly, and from a public-facing perspective, the Shor Expedition's goal was to investigate the condition of the bedrock around the Sphinx, determine the level of the water table, and to, quote, make it safe for tourists, end quote. In reality, however, being a project run by members of the ARE, the goal was always to try and determine the existence of, and even enter, what's known as the Hall of Records, said to exist according to both historical accounts and the visions of the so-called American prophet and psychic Edgar Cayce. Cayce claimed that one of the 3 mythical Hall of Records, a repository of knowledge from ancient lost civilizations, was located beneath the pores of the Sphinx. Despite these seeming contradictions in goals, in 1996 the Shor Expedition went ahead and was documented by Boris Said, but as mentioned, none of this footage was ever released as he ended up in a dispute and court battle with Joseph Shor. Boris Said's claims about the Shor Expedition and what actually happened gave this lost or unreleased footage something of a mythical status. Here's another clip from my previous video of Boris on the same Art Bell radio interview in the late 90s.
And he said, what about if we open a tunnel that's never been opened before? And I said, where? And he said, under the Sphinx. And I said, that would do it.
That would do it.
Right. So Dr. Hawass took us out to the rear of the Sphinx one day with our crew following along obediently. And he crawled down into a hole under the tail of the Sphinx, but there's a huge sort of an excavation inside the rump of the Sphinx, which has been all shored up like a mine shaft. And they've been prowling around in there. And Dr. Hawass allowed himself to be filmed standing in the bottom of that hole, and he said, it's a great quote. He wrote it. I wish I'd written it. He said, even Indiana Jones wouldn't dream to be here now. We're now inside the body of the Sphinx, and we don't know where this tunnel leads, but we're going to open it for the first time.
While I'd known about the footage from the Shor Expedition existing for many years, the search that I put in, as well as many other people put in, proved fruitless. And from what I knew about the scope of the project and what happened, the fact that this footage both existed and couldn't be found was somehow both tantalizing and frustrating at the same time. For years, I'd wondered about this footage. right up until someone was good enough to digitize an old VHS tape and upload it as an unlisted video on YouTube. I had met Trevor Grassi at the Cosmic Summit earlier in 2025, having known about his work, and once he was aware of the existence of this video, he was kind enough to let me know also, so many thanks to Trevor for bringing it to my attention. Apparently, after the Art Bell interviews, Boris Said took some of that footage and made a short film, essentially a promotional film pitching a follow-up documentary to The Mystery of the Sphinx. He was selling VHS tapes of this pitch as a chance to invest in the project. Unfortunately, Boris passed away in March of 2002 from liver cancer before this project could ever be realized. So there the footage lay, in a handful of VHS tapes in random homes for nearly 25 years. One thing that Boris explains in his short film was the reality of what the goals of the Shor Expedition were.
I took this short promotional film to Dr. Shor, and 2 months later signed a joint venture agreement with the Shor Foundation to make a film about the exploration and search for the secret chamber under the paws of the Sphinx. Dr. Shor became the leader of the expedition and took charge of all science while providing me with the funds to make my movie. It seemed like a perfect alliance. Shortly before we returned to Egypt with a full crew, Dr. Shor announced publicly his purpose for conducting the expeditions in Egypt. Dr. Shor stated that he was searching for, quote, underground faults, unquote, on the Giza Plateau in order to safeguard tourists in the event of earthquakes on the Giza Plateau. Right. I was astonished. I mean, Dr. Shor had been on our first expedition. Dr. Shor had been an observer for the Casey Foundation. Dr. Shor's sole interest was in finding the chamber under the Great Sphinx. I couldn't understand the reason for all this double talk.
The more interesting part of this lost footage, and as Boris expressed in the Art Bell interviews, was what they managed to film with Zahi Hawass. And it goes pretty much exactly as he said it did with Art Bell. I think this film and the subsequent events that we'll get into should have a real impact on our understanding of the truth of what's below the ground at the Giza Plateau.
Dr. Hawass motioned us to follow him and led us to the rump of the Sphinx. There he uncovered a small passage, a sort of opening to a tunnel underneath the rump, and carefully lowered himself down into a tunnel-like structure or cavern under the rump of the Sphinx. And then an extraordinary thing happened.
Really, even Indiana Jones will never dream to be here. Can you believe it? We are now inside the Sphinx in this tunnel. This tunnel has been never opened before. No one really knows what's inside this tunnel. But we are going to open it for the first time.
This footage is, frankly, pretty amazing. Hawass is standing down in the well-known cavity in the rear of the Sphinx, and he's saying that there is a tunnel here that's never been opened, and that they're going to open it. On a recent visit to Egypt, we were down in the Sphinx enclosure and got a pretty good look into this space, nearly 30 years after Hawass was filmed in here. Notice the central steel beam. It's the same one that Hawass is moving around in the shot that was taken from within the cavity looking back up towards the opening. It's also clear that whatever happened here in the past, any tunnels or passages have been sealed up and backfilled, and probably then some. Even from where the camera is in this shot is deeper than the passage that is currently accessible. And when Zahi was standing down there talking about opening the passage, his head is well lower than the ground level that we can see in this modern footage. So it's definitely been backfilled. What might have happened here? Well, as Boris Said said, this footage was taken around October of 1995, and according to Said, this is what happened afterwards.
Several days later, I met with Dr. Hawass and his superior, Dr. Nur el-Din, who was the secretary of the Egyptian Antiquities Organization. We discussed a contract and the possibility that Dr. Hawass would actually open this new tunnel under the Sphinx while we would do the filming. They promised to consider the contract and get back to me in a week or 10 days, and I returned to New York. There has never been another mention of that contract, and I never heard from them about the tunnel again.
Although Boris Said never heard from the Egyptian authorities again, a curious thing occurred in Egypt several months later. As reported by Graham Hancock and Robert Boval in their book The Message of the Sphinx, which was titled Keepers of Genesis in the UK, on April 14th of 1996, in the Arabic publication Egyptian Gazette, Zahi Hawass reported finding, quote, hidden tunnels around the pyramid and Sphinx, end quote. From my own search, I've found references to a similar statement being made on exactly the same day in the Egyptian Al Ahram Arabic newspaper, as reported by several sources, in which Hawass claimed to have, quote, found a vertical shaft of limestone leading to 3 tunnels, end quote. And he described them as one on the north side of the Sphinx, one on the middle southern side, and a third whose details were unknown. He was also reported as suggesting that there, quote, might be more rooms beneath the Sphinx than there are in the pyramids, end quote, and that he emphasized the significance of the findings. As far as I know, this discovery was never mentioned again in any media or official channels, and there was no follow-up to these announcements in any Arabic publications. The position of mainstream Egyptology and the authorities in Egypt to this day remains that no such tunnels or chambers beneath the Sphinx exist. Isn't that interesting? Only a bare few months after this announcement, Hawass reportedly shut down the Shor Expedition, saying on South African radio that he had halted the project because, quote, their work had not followed the correct steps, end quote. What do you think happened here? Is it possible that, as Hawass said, this tunnel was indeed opened? Why else would he make such a specific statement in Arabic publications only a few months after Boris Said filmed him saying that he would open it? And then why was this never mentioned again? I guess we'll never know, but it's certainly open to speculation. Maybe it's possible that they just never opened it. But in that case, why were these reports so specific about the 3 tunnels and chambers that existed beneath the Sphinx? To me, these statements are strangely reminiscent of al-Masudi's account from the 10th century AD, who also spoke of a central chamber leading to 3 tunnels. Even if Hawass and his team did enter whatever chambers might be down there, I very much doubt that they were the first ones to do so. As we covered earlier, there are many accounts of those passages that come to us throughout antiquity. Even Manu Seyfezada's book, Under the Sphinx, speculated on this and provides good evidence that the Old Kingdom Egyptians themselves might have been the first recipients of knowledge from a hidden subterranean hall of records. If you haven't read it, this is an excellent book, as it provides substantial evidence for a long history of knowledge gained and protected throughout the ancient Egyptian civilization. Graham Hancock wrote the foreword to this book, quoting him, quote, imagine my surprise, therefore, when Manu's book, for which I'm glad to have been asked to provide this foreword, turned out to be the first substantial and significant addition to human knowledge concerning the Sphinx since the breakthroughs of the 1990s. Under the Sphinx proves, beyond reasonable doubt, that a massive lion statue stood at Giza long before the 4th dynasty, at which point, roughly around the accepted date of 2550 BC, it was recarved with a human head to take the form of the Sphinx. An archive of prehistoric documents was stored in a portable wooden container in a chamber beneath the lion predecessor of the Sphinx. After a breach, this archive was later removed to another place, but certain priestly officials continued to have access to it. Reproduced in art and hieroglyphs on the coffin of a high-ranking ancient Egyptian nobleman, information leaked from the archive reveals that the records once held beneath the Sphinx contained exact scientific knowledge of the workings of the solar system. Knowledge that was far in advance of anything possessed by the ancient Egyptians, and that the ancient Egyptians themselves did not understand. End quote. So we have multiple accounts now over hundreds, even thousands of years describing tunnels and chambers beneath the Sphinx. We have strong circumstantial evidence put together by Manu Seyfezada, and most importantly, we have 2 separate seismic and ground-penetrating radar surveys that confirm such chambers exist. There also seems to have been something of a denial, if not an outright cover-up, of these scientific results. If you watch my video on the Labyrinth, you might think there's something of a pattern being established here. Although the Shor Expedition was halted in late 1996, it wasn't just the claims about the Sphinx that drove this decision, as this was far from the only discovery made by the Shor Expedition team on the Giza Plateau, nor the only, let's say, very interesting location that was examined with ground-penetrating radar. In Boris's short film, he talks about first being shown the mysterious Osiris Shaft by a local guide back in 1992. The Osiris Shaft is a subterranean feature found about 300 meters up the Middle Pyramid causeway from the Sphinx. It has a small, nondescript entrance that leads down vertical shafts to 3 chambers at different levels, the lowest being around 100 feet or 30 meters below the bedrock surface. There are several large single-piece stone boxes in the bottom 2 levels of the shaft, one of these being made from dacite, which is a hard stone type for which there is no known quarry in Egypt. The very bottom level is a large open chamber that today is almost entirely underwater thanks to the rising water table in Egypt. I made a video a couple of years back about the Osiris Shaft and the evidence for other undiscovered chambers beneath the Great Causeway, so if you're looking for more info on it, please do check that one out. The link is below in the description. The Osiris Shaft has always been a mysterious place. It's been known about since at least the 1940s, and was used as a well for water by locals for roughly 20 years after the 1960s. The bottom chamber supposedly had 4 bedrock columns in it originally. They were rumoured to have been destroyed by religious fanatics 60 or 70 years ago. In early 1997, Boris Said and his team returned to the Osiris Shaft. The account of what happened is documented not only in his recently discovered film, but also by Ray Grassi, another attendee of the expedition, along with Egyptologist and author J.J. Hurtak, who I had the pleasure of meeting earlier this year. During their visit, the water table was at an unusually low level, and far more of the bottom chamber was accessible and could be seen, certainly relative to what you'll see today if you ever venture down there. I do always offer people the chance to visit the shaft on my trips to Egypt as an optional special permission. I will say that it's not for everyone. You do have to climb down and back up some very long ladders, and it's certainly not for the faint of heart. Boris and his team, while filming at the bottom level, noticed a corner of dark stone poking up from the sediment. They didn't have permission to dig or to do anything other than film, but when their minders went back up the ladder for one reason or the other, curiosity prevailed and they started to clear around the stone. They had discovered the large stone lid from a box, a couple of feet thick. Although the team was there to film, that certainly wasn't the only thing they did. Boris Said had also brought back Dr. Debeki with his ground-penetrating radar, and he quickly set to work scanning the floor of the lowest section of the Osiris Shaft.
For a while, everything went smoothly. Debeki was lowered safely to the bottom of the well. He fired up his radar and soon established that the black granite slab was only the lid of a sarcophagus. It was about 2 feet thick, and there was no sarcophagus underneath it. Then we hit the jackpot. The radar showed a void located about 9 feet below the sarcophagus lid. According to Dr. Debeki, this anomalous cavity, as he called it, descended at an angle of 25 degrees directly toward the rear of the Sphinx, 300 yards to the east. Dr. Debeki stated that this steeply dipping characteristic convinced him that this was not a natural fault, but rather a man-made feature. And then we found the icing on the cake, which convinced us all. A transverse radar scan revealed that this cavity was about 8 feet wide and had a domed ceiling.
This is remarkable, and we have a little bit to unpack here. First of all, and most importantly, we seem to have scientific evidence for deeper passages and chambers, below the lowest known chamber of the Osiris Shaft with Dr. Debeki's ground-penetrating radar scans. If you've been paying attention to the recent space-based synthetic aperture radar and Doppler tomography scan work at the Giza Plateau, you'll know that Filippo Biondi and Armando May have also used their technology to scan up and down the causeway and to scan the Osiris Shaft itself. Not only do their scans match the known topography of the shaft, they also indicate that there are further tunnels and chambers beneath its known bottom level. So, much like the space-based scans of the Great Labyrinth that I shared in my last video, here again we seem to have some correlation between well-known technologies like GPR and more modern emerging technologies like synthetic aperture radar, Doppler tomography. As some of you might know, Zahi Hawass is somewhat famous, at least in my circles, for publicly stating several times that he doesn't believe in radar, referring to ground-penetrating radar. I actually recorded him saying this in person at the Graham Hancock tour of Egypt in 2015, and he said that he'd used radar in all of his work and he'd never discovered anything with it, hence he didn't believe in it.
No merit. The radar showed anything? Because I don't believe in radar. I have been using radar in all my work. It never made any discovery.
He also recently reiterated the same thing on the Joe Rogan Experience, that he's never found anything with radar.
I have been I'm excavating also in the Valley of the Kings.
Right.
And I discovered major important things that we can talk about it.
So if you're going back
but I
2,500
used radar
radar
in all my excavation.
What do you mean?
And I never had a result by radar.
Well, let me say that I think I understand the origins of that statement. If you watched my recent Labyrinth video, you'll know that there were 2 GPR surveys done at that site, one during the Matterhorn expedition and another one done later by Cairo University, both confirming the presence of large underground structures. These results were covered up and suppressed. Now we know that at least 2 more GPR and seismic surveys have been done at the Sphinx, both by the same qualified expert, Dr. Doppler, one during John Anthony West's work in 1991 and the other during the Shor Expedition in 1996. Both confirmed the presence of large, regular chambers and passages beneath the Sphinx, and both were denied and rejected by Hawass and Lehner. We also have ground-penetrating radar findings that indeed there does seem to be lower chambers and tunnels beneath the deepest known part of the Osiris Shaft on the Great Causeway that lies between the Middle Pyramid and the Sphinx. The GPR findings for the Great Labyrinth, the GPR findings showing chambers and passages beneath the Sphinx, and the GPR findings showing there's more to the Osiris Shaft than we originally thought certainly seem like they could be somewhat problematic for the status quo of Egyptology. No wonder he says that he doesn't believe in radar. He certainly doesn't seem to like anything that it finds, or at least he doesn't want the public to believe them. Boris Said goes on in his promo film to explain what happened after they made the discovery at the Osiris Shaft, and that brings us up to the date of when he made this short film that has only recently been revealed.
That's when the trouble really started. I rushed off to find our Egyptian inspector to tell him what we'd found, and he told me that we had no right to use the radar down in the well on this trip. He said that our permit specifically called for the right to shoot, to film the radar, not to operate it. And that's when I found out that Dr. Shor's permit to explore the plateau had been revoked at the end of 1996. Somehow he had neglected to tell me that small detail. That brings us to where we are today, more or less. Dr. Shor has started a lawsuit and has snarled our film in a lengthy court battle.
As Boris said, the Shor Expedition permit was indeed cancelled in 1996, and Boris Said had no further agency in Egypt. He did attempt to still make his film, and by his account, he met with Zahi Hawass shortly before making this revealed promo video. He met with him, funnily enough, at an ARE event in the United States, and although Hawass was willing to continue making the film, he would do so only if Boris Said and Joseph Shor could resolve their differences.
As recently as 4 weeks ago, I went down to the Edgar Casey Foundation, where Dr. Shor and Zahi Hawass were both featured speakers. I met with Dr. Hawass, and he agreed that he would help us enter the tunnel. He would actually enter the tunnel himself and allow us to film it, if Dr. Shor would agree to a peaceful settlement of our problems. I tried, but unfortunately Dr. Shor would have none of it. He refused, and that was the end of that. Now, finally, I've become convinced that Dr. Shor never wanted to go public with this information at all. I believe that it was always his intention to keep news of the secret chamber and its contents from the public. I believe he used me. I believe he used my ability to get a permit, my ability to get things done in Egypt, to further his own private purposes. I think he intended to keep this from the world from the very beginning.
The intrigue doesn't quite stop here either, and this is important as it establishes a pattern of behavior, particularly when it comes to the authorities and new discoveries. You'd think that the discovery of a sarcophagus and the evidence for tunnels below the Osiris Shaft would be cause for investigation, and indeed, it seems that they were. quoting Ray Grassi from his article recounting his time in the Osiris Shaft. Quote, "When Egyptian officials caught wind of what we'd uncovered down below, the whole mood of the expedition changed dramatically. I now saw local officials whispering to one another off to the sides, obviously trying to figure out what to do about this unexpected turn of events. Boris and Joseph Shor tried to play down what had been found while talking with plateau officials, and began negotiating just how much more research or filming would be allowed from that point on. Boris, in particular, was anxious to obtain permissions for exploring the underground chamber further, especially beneath the mysterious stone slab. But Boris and Joseph now seemed blocked at every turn, as the rest of the group began growing restless. It was clear the officials in charge suspected this could turn out to be something important, and did not want to lose control of the situation. Exactly 1 year later, on February 16th of 1998, I opened the newspaper to find this story published by the Reuters news service with the headline, quote, "Egyptians find tomb of ancient god Osiris," end quote. It read, quote, "Sinking water levels have revealed a granite sarcophagus of the ancient Egyptian god Osiris in a 30-meter, 98 feet deep tomb at the Giza pyramids," Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass said on Wednesday, end quote. Apparently, during the 12 months since our team left Cairo, Zahi and his crew had been busy clearing out the chamber, and discovered that the slab we uncovered was indeed the lid to a stone sarcophagus, or royal coffin. It turned out to be empty, and was partially underwater. Zahi seemed to feel the chamber and its contents weren't really that old by Egyptian standards, perhaps dating from the period around 600 BC, give or take 50 to 75 years. He also suggested the archaic chamber could be the mythical Tomb of Osiris, described in tradition as a stone sarcophagus on an island surrounded by water deep underground where Osiris rose from the dead. Could this chamber we explored be that very spot? According to the press releases, Zahi certainly thought so. He went on to declare that this was the most important archaeological discovery of his entire career. Quote, "I never excavated this shaft before because it was always full of water," Zahi said. "But when the water went down about a year ago, we started the adventure." End quote. The most important discovery of his career? That took me by surprise, since he had made no mention at all of Hertak, Boris, or the ARE, even though they were the ones ultimately responsible for it. But perhaps I shouldn't have been surprised, since Zahi had something of a reputation as a claim jumper on discoveries set into motion by others. As someone once explained to me, the politics of Egyptology are as bad, if not worse, than anything you'll encounter in the halls of Washington, D.C. It was 1 year later, in March of 1999, that Zahi's work down in this chamber was given worldwide TV exposure in the form of a Fox television special entitled Opening the Lost Tomb Live, hosted by Maury Povich. During the primetime special, viewers were treated to video footage of the chamber itself, images of the half-submerged sarcophagus and its suspended lid, and, of course, Zahi himself presiding proudly over his discovery. It was exciting to see how the chamber looked with much of the mud and debris cleared out, and the sarcophagus revealed more fully now. But it was disappointing too, seeing how Boris, Hertak, and the ARE team were essentially being erased from the history books. End quote. And indeed, you can find this Fox television special on YouTube. I've shown clips from it before. There is no mention of deeper layers or chambers, but there absolutely are tunnels leading off both up and down the causeway, southwest towards the Middle Pyramid and perhaps even to the Great Pyramid, and east towards the Sphinx. Along with this TV special, Hawass also wrote about this period of work in the Osiris Shaft on his blog in 1999. His blog doesn't exist any longer, but all hail the Internet Archive. Here is Zahi Hawass discussing the Western Tunnel.
Edgar Casey talked years and years ago about a lost civilization, hidden tunnels that would lead to answers about it. Could this have anything to do with that?
You know, Susie, Casey, Edgar Casey and lost civilization, it's a legend, it's a myth. The Arabs in the last century, they talked about all of this, and psychic brought it to us back. But to be fair, I did not excavate this tunnel yet. Then really I don't know where it leads us. But I always say that you never know what the sand and the tunnels of Egypt may hide of secrets.
The tunnel going east towards the Sphinx was evidenced by a backfilled or collapsed tunnel that Boris Said and his team noted as being blocked by, quote, a pile of rocks. They sought to obtain permission to move the rocks around and see what they could find, but they were denied.
At the easterly end of the well, the end closest to the Sphinx, a pile of rocks was clearly visible. I went back to the old well with our camera crew. We climbed down to the bottom and found to our surprise that the water level had dropped by at least 15 feet. There, along the easterly wall, was the pile of rocks, just as I had seen it, underwater. The pile was now easily accessible. The plan was to explore the well with radar and then attempt to persuade the authorities to do an impromptu dig in the rock pile to see what lay behind it. We felt that since the rocks had already been moved once, we would not actually be excavating, just sort of rearranging.
For a long time, I had thought that these tunnels had never been investigated, but that's not the case. It seems that the discovery, initiated by Boris Said and the ARE, then claimed by Hawass as his own, stirred up more international interest in the possibilities for a hidden underworld beneath the Giza Plateau. Japanese researchers, as well as many Japanese people, have always been deeply interested in the mysteries of ancient Egypt. I recall Graham Hancock telling me once that out of all of the foreign translations of his book Fingerprints of the Gods, the Japanese version proved to be very successful. In the 2000s, teams of Japanese researchers, in partnership with Hawass, investigated the Osiris Shaft a couple of times. A Japanese TV broadcast in 2005 laid the groundwork for the idea that the southwestern tunnel from the Osiris Shaft might well connect not to the Middle Pyramid, but rather to the Great Pyramid, and gives us further detail of the tunnel described by Hawass in the Fox special from 1999. Many thanks again to my friend, moderator, and guru of audio enhancements and obscure internet finds, Matt Redmond, for somehow digging this footage up and translating it. So we know for sure that there is at least 9 meters of a tunnel extending towards the pyramids from the lowest layer of the Osiris Shaft. 4 years after this was shown, and 10 years after the Fox special in 2009, another Japanese team went down into the Osiris Shaft with Hawass and probed this same tunnel with an endoscopic camera in a pipe. There are only a few minutes of this footage available at a poor resolution and frame rate, but what it reveals is truly amazing.
その調査を谷本先生率いる大阪大学の調査隊が行いました。岩盤の専門家から見ても、この3層構造に掘られた縦穴は興味深いもの。いつのトンネル、宮本たちの見た入り口から10メートルの先はどうなっているのか。用意したのは医療用の内視鏡。それを特別に長く改良し、トンネルの奥を覗こうという作戦です。内視鏡をトンネルの奥深くに挿入するためにパイプが用意されました。パイプをつないで行き、その中に内視鏡を通すのです。ザヒ博士も興味津々で調査の様子を見に来ました。二人はスフィンクスの調査などで窮地の間柄です。
This is camera head, yeah, which is used for medical inspection. Yeah, when they need a certain operation. But the mud will stop it. So I have decided to have a pipe, guide pipe here. But the pipe maybe it's very narrow. How this pipe will go? This can go. This can go? Yeah. Okay.
でたのはパイプに入った泥でした。泥を押しのけると、トンネル15メートル地点の内部が映し出されました。OK。蝶にカメラを奥へと送ります。鮮明に映し出されたトンネルの中。下の部分には土ぼこりが溜まっています。入り口から16メートル。 入り口から17メートル、土を押しのけ進んでいくと、きれいに削られた場所に到達。これは明らかに人工的に掘られた跡に見えます。
OK。いってるよ。すごくスムーズにいってるよ。
19メートル。カメラをさらに奥へと進めます。狭く曲がっていますが、トンネルは続いている。そしてなぜか、トンネルは2つに分かれています。
This is remarkable footage. There is 100% man-made rock-cut tunnels and chambers down here. The orientation of the camera is a little difficult to follow, but at the extent of the footage you can see what appears to be a large chamber, with a doorway at the end, and the commentary says the tunnel splits, presumably going in different directions. Is it possible that one of these connects to the Great Pyramid? And might this be the network of tunnels and chambers described by the Arab authors in antiquity, when the workmen got lost for more than a day exploring tunnels they entered from inside the Great Pyramid? I've always wondered about the great pit in the floor of the subterranean chamber. As far as I know, it's never actually been fully excavated and explored. Is it possible this might serve as a gateway or a door to this system of tunnels? The evidence for a hidden underworld at the Giza Plateau just keeps on piling up. It seems that this exploration in 2009 was the last effort made in the Osiris Shaft, at least that I can find, and I can't find any records of an exploration of the eastern tunnel that Boris Said reported. Perhaps this might be because it must slope down with the angle of the plateau, which means that the water level would prove extremely challenging in trying to penetrate this alleged passage. Today, the entire chamber is almost entirely underwater, as are the tunnels themselves, with only the merest top of the southwestern passage being visible above the waterline. We being our current civilization, could definitely explore these if we wanted to. As with the Great Labyrinth, the water can be pumped out, and the debris and mud can be removed. The southwestern tunnel is likely to even be free of the water as the plateau slopes up in elevation towards the pyramids, and there's a good chance the tunnel and whatever chambers it connects to might slope up with it. These discoveries and explorations that took place in the late 90s through the 2000s might have been the last serious effort to penetrate the underworld at Giza. Despite Tom DeBecky's ground-penetrating radar findings for even deeper chambers and passages in the Osiris Shaft, as far as I know, no serious effort has ever been made to confirm them or to try and explore them. That is, until now, with the Italian team of Bionde and May, with their space-based scanning technology, seeming to confirm that something does in fact exist down there. All of our efforts in our modern times and with our modern technology only seem to be lending credibility to the frankly incredible accounts of a lost underworld at Giza that come to us from antiquity. So, much like the tale of the Great Labyrinth, here at the Great Sphinx of Giza, as well as up and down the causeway, we have solid evidence that there is much more than what is stated by the textbooks and the orthodox position of Egyptology. Here again, we see a history of discovery, driven by independent researchers outside of the academic field, only to find that their discoveries are either dismissed, covered up, or claimed by those in positions of authority for essentially their own glorification. The well of unknowns and hidden history in Egypt is a deep one, and although we may never know the truth of what actually lies beneath the surface of these ancient monuments, I can only hope that more awareness of the work already done by dedicated individuals like Boris Said will drive some more interest and spark a reinvestigation, one that uses more of our modern technology and our tools to get at the truth. After all, the history of this place belongs to all of mankind, and not just to those who self-style themselves as the modern pharaohs of the pyramids. There is even more that happened during the Shor Expedition, like Tom Danley's sonic experiments inside the Great Pyramid, but I'll leave an exploration of that for another time. And you can always check out Boris Said's short film yourself. The link to the unlisted video is below in the description. As always, I hope everyone out there is doing well, and if you like my work, please do consider supporting Uncharted X via the value for value model that's outlined on my website at unchartedx.com/support. Many thanks to those who do choose to support me and my work. It's through your generosity and patronage that I have the privilege to continue doing what I do on this channel. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye now.